Happy New Year, everyone! I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday and have started the year off running. I obviously haven't. I couldn't quite get my head out of the holiday season and enjoyed eating and drinking a bit too much. But have no fear, I will do my best to post 2 videos this week to make up for my laziness. Anyway, what better way to start the new year with some creepy stories from Japan? Let's get right into it. My parents' home is in the countryside of Kyushu. It's a rather large house in Japanese standards, measuring about 400 square meters. One usually sees a few Japanese dolls in old rural homes. Well, my parents' house was no different as they owned a few themselves. When I was 4 years old, I had a strange dream. In the dream, the dolls would follow me everywhere. They didn't actually walk, but whenever I went around the house, the dolls would be sitting there in their respective glass cases as if they'd been waiting for me. I told my family about the dream. They all laughed, but the dream felt so real that I was scared of the dolls that were kept around the house. Just as the memory of the dream was fading from my memory, something terrifying happened that brought it all back. When I got out of the bath and opened the door, I saw 4 or 5 dolls all lined up in front of me. Just as I had seen them in my dream, they were all standing in their glass cases. I screamed. My family immediately rushed in, and there was a moment of silence when they saw the dolls. Luckily, this was none other than a prank played by my brother, who's 8 years older than me. He knew I was deathly afraid of them and thought it would be a brilliant idea to do so. Due to a change of circumstances, my mother had to start working alongside my father. After my brother finished school and he too began to work, he moved out and only came back for fixed events such as New Year's Day. This meant that I was home alone from the time club activities ended at school until around 10 o'clock at night. Every time I was alone, I began feeling like multiple eyes were staring at me. Thinking back, it may have all been in my head because of my fear of being alone in that huge house. Anyway, the days went by peacefully. When I was in my 2nd year of high school, though, my father started acting strangely. He started covering the full-length mirror in his and my mum's bedroom with a cloth. I was at an age where I wanted to look fashionable, so I often used that full-length mirror, but one day when I went out after using it, I forgot to cover it back up. When I got home, my dad was pissed. I'd never seen him get so angry. I asked him why he was so upset over such a minor thing, and he said, "I can feel their eyes on me. Even when I'm sleeping, even in my dreams, it makes me feel sick. I can't help but feel like the doll's gazes are reflected in the mirror and staring at me." A cold shiver went down my spine. I wasn't the only one who felt those stares. After graduating from high school, I left home to attend college. And after I left my parents' house, I no longer felt like I was being observed. One day I went to visit my brother, and one of the first questions he asked me was whether I felt anything different when I left our parents' house. I asked him why he was asking, and he replied, "Because they were watching you." What the hell was he saying? I told him to explain what he meant, and the following is what he said. "The dream you had when you were little was something similar to Mieko, our older sister's dream. When I had that dream, it was hide and seek, and in Mieko's dream, it was green light, red light." I was stunned. When I told my family about the dream, they all laughed it off. I would have never thought that my siblings had similar dreams and that the games these Japanese dolls were playing were different in each of them. My brother continued, "I'm gonna come clean, but I wasn't the one who lined up the dolls in front of the bathroom that time you came out. If I hadn't said that it was me who did it, everyone would have freaked out, especially you." It's not really something to worry about. They're not dangerous. I'm sure Dad's told you about it at least once, right? That our ancestor was a defeated samurai warrior called Shiba? Here's a story you probably don't know. I heard this from our grandmother who died before you were born. Shiba was treated really well by the people in the area after he came home from the fight. So, as a way to thank the villagers, he taught the children some academic stuff and played with them a lot. Here's where my own theory sets in. I think that some of the children he taught died young, and they've possessed this house and our family because they still want to play. I didn't know what to say. To be honest, the fact that the dolls moved on their own was much more frightening than his story about our ancestor, Shiba. I still can't bring myself to believe it. How is it that my brother is so calm about it? I also have a question. What are those stares that my father's feeling at home? My brother's assumptions don't make sense because my father admitted that he'd never had nightmares like we did about those Japanese dolls. So why were they staring at him? My dad's fear was real. I could tell he wasn't making it up. Anyway, the full-length mirror in my parents' house is still covered with a cloth, and for a lack of a better way to say it, the dolls are still alive and well. I, on the other hand, am constantly worried that something bad will happen to my father. A young mother who looked to be in her mid to late 20s moved in next door with her baby. From the size of the bundle she was carrying, the baby was probably only a couple of months old. They didn't have a lot of personal belongings. Everything seemed to fit in one small truck. I never saw the father, so she must have been a single mum for one reason or another. More often than not, I would bump into her every time I left my unit. She was always standing outside her door, rocking the baby back and forth while it slept in the pram. I would say hello to her each time, but her replies were always so soft I could barely hear her. She would not make eye contact, and she always seemed to have a dark shadow looming over her. I could kind of guess the reason as to why. When I was in my apartment, I could sometimes hear the baby crying through the walls. It wasn't long before I could hear her cry every single day and the mother yelling in anger and frustration. My unit was at the end of the hall and the one next to me was empty for quite some time, so I was used to my quiet space. After the mother and the baby moved in, however, it was the opposite. But she was still my neighbor and I didn't want to be unkind, so I always said hello and sometimes tried to have some small talk with her whenever I saw her. At first, we talked about the weather. Then I asked her how old her baby was, how there was a baby shop not far, etc. I figured having easy and relatable conversations might make her feel better and more relaxed. Just as I thought, she began to talk to me a bit by bit. Her voice was still as soft as ever, her expression still dark and gloomy. The baby stopped crying as much, and in turn, the mother's yelling. A month after they moved in, the baby stopped crying completely. The baby that had been making so much noise didn't mutter a peep for the last week or so. The mother was quiet too. It was back to my old, quiet living space. I don't know anything about babies, but maybe they're sensitive to change. Maybe that's why she was crying so much when they first moved in, but now that she was used to her new home, she's calmed down. One day, I got home from work and the mother was outside as usual, rocking her baby in the pram. "Hey there, how's the baby doing?" I asked. I leaned in to sneak a peek when she sort of stepped away from me and said, "Sorry, she just fell asleep, so..." She got interrupted when her phone started ringing. She realized the phone wasn't on her and ran inside to answer it, leaving the baby outside. I couldn't leave her by herself, so I proceeded to rock the baby back and forth in its pram and waited for the mum to come back. Considering I hadn't seen the baby's face yet, I decided to use this chance to take a look. I reached in to move the blanket a little bit, but what I saw was just a rolled up towel. The following story may have content that could be triggering for some. Viewer discretion is advised. My sister had bulimia. Since her second year of high school, my older sister started eating a lot. She's always been a good eater for a girl, but she started eating a lot more junk food and she began eating 2 servings for every single meal. She seemed to be exercising a little bit here and there, but her appetite increased disproportionately to that. She used to be of average weight, but by the summer of her 3rd year, she had become obese. I was vaguely aware that it was bulimia, but my family, especially my mother, had little interest in my sister and just turned a blind eye. My older sister has a quiet personality, and because of our parents, she hardly ever talked about school or friends, but her grades at school were average, and her athletic ability was a bit above average. Although she only had a small number of friends, they often came over to our house and they would go out from time to time. She always had a smile on her face and treated everyone well. However, around summer, her unhealthy eating habits became glaringly obvious, and I started to worry. Whenever I'd ask her if she was okay and that maybe she was eating too much, she'd always laugh and say everything was fine and she'd exercise later. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to be getting increasingly annoyed and pissed off at my sister the more weight she gained. One day, she yelled out, "You trying to eat up the whole house? If you want to continue eating like that, get out!" My sister didn't fight back. She had an extremely sad expression on her face, and from the following day, she went back to eating normal portions of food. She remained this way for an entire week, and I wondered whether an eating disorder like this could be this easy to overcome. As you may have already guessed, no, it isn't that easy to cure. A little past midnight in August, about 2 weeks later, I was having trouble sleeping, so I went downstairs to the kitchen to grab some water. I knew where everything was, so I walked around without turning the lights on. That's when I heard a noise and felt someone's presence in the kitchen. There was a faint light seeping out. My heart started pounding. My initial thought was that I had walked into a robbery in progress. I crept towards the kitchen as quietly as I could. When I peeked in, it was my sister. She was sitting on the floor in front of the fridge. The faint light was coming from the open fridge door. She was vigorously stuffing something into her mouth and chewing. It sounded like someone chewing gum, but when I finally turned the light on, I was horrified at what I saw. My sister was gnawing on raw meat. Pure, uncooked beef that my mum had bought. It wasn't just that though. There was raw chicken, vegetables, ham, raw eggs, margarine and seasonings such as sauce and mayonnaise spread out all around her. The back drawer was also open, and dry goods and powdered items like pancake mix were scattered around. Last but not least, there was a huge pool of vomit spread all over the floor. I flipped out. I grabbed her shoulders, snatched the raw beef out of her hands, and asked her if she was okay. She looked up at me with a completely crazed look in her eyes and said, "Huh? Oh, it's okay. It's fine, don't worry." It was a casual reply, and her tone of voice was as normal as it could get. I cried out in horror as my sister was clearly broken. I couldn't let out a single word. I just stood there crying like a baby until my parents finally came downstairs after hearing all the commotion. They weren't happy with what they saw. They tried to get us to explain, but I couldn't string any words together, and my sister, who had stopped eating at this point, sat there looking extremely sad. When my sister began to throw up again, my parents rushed her to a local hospital. Once there, her stomach was immediately pumped. Naturally, the bacteria from all the raw meat she ate got into her system, so she was hospitalized until she recovered. My parents finally realized the seriousness of her eating disorder, and after she got discharged, they began to pay more attention to her as if their previous neglect had been a figment of my imagination. My sister was as gentle as ever. Not once did she get angry or use abusive language. She just continued to smile and interact with us as before, apologizing for what she put us through and admitting that something wasn't right deep within her. She began to study hard to pass her university exam. I went back to my usual cycle of going to school and coming home, and with my parents becoming a bit kinder, we continued plodding on with our daily lives. It was a few months later, in the winter, that my sister committed suicide. It was sudden. It was Sunday, and my sister was at her friend's house all day until the late afternoon. When she got home, she told us she forgot something at her friend's house and that she was going to go back to get it. That was the last time we saw her. There had been no change in her demeanor in the days leading up to it. In fact, she seemed to be a bit happier than usual, so none of us could have ever fathomed something like this would happen. She had gone to a mountain nearby and hanged herself. There was a suicide note that only read, "I'm sorry," next to the fallen footstool. With the funeral and other things, her room wasn't touched and was left as it was since the day she was found. When things finally began to calm down, my parents and I decided it was time to clean it up. When I was sorting through her closet, I found 3 notebooks hidden among the stuffed animals and other things she pushed far back into the wardrobe. There was nothing written on the plain cover, so I casually flipped through the pages. There was a list of what she ate on each particular day, where she went, and what she ate when she was out. She described how much of each thing she ate and how her stomach hurt from it. There were entries where she bitched about me and our parents, about how they only listened to me and how she wished we would hurry up and die. She referred to my parents and I as things, not people. It's ignoring me again. They only listen to that thing. Wish it would hurry up and die. They're less than insects, less than a fucking ant. Wish a truck would crash into them all. Other entries where she was yelling and repeating the words die over and over again. She also wrote about her school and other people she knew, what they did and how much they annoyed and pissed her off. Everything was written in red ink. It was a diary, and she wrote in it almost every single day. The entries filled every page, and the first entry was the day she entered high school. On the oldest of the 3 books, there was something written on the back of the notebook. It said, "There were 6 other books, but I burnt them," indicating that my sister had been writing these entries even before she entered high school. On the very last entry, there was a date in the middle of the page which coincided with the day she took her life. And almost like a kindergartner's doodle was a crude picture of herself hanging with a smile across her face. I'm going to mix a bit of fake information so that I can't be identified. Just a warning, this is going to be a long one. This happened a few years ago. I left the countryside and lived alone in a shabby apartment in Hachioji, near Tokyo, to attend a women's college. Instead of participating in club activities, I worked part-time at a family restaurant near my apartment. The hourly wage was around $8. I got a $700 allowance from my parents, of which $500 of it went towards rent and $200 for living expenses. The money I made from my part-time job went towards social activities. It didn't amount to much at all, and it quickly disappeared if I ever bought clothes, bags, shoes, or went out drinking with my friends. I was wondering whether there was another job where I could earn much more in a short time when I walked past a guy handing out free pocket tissue papers in front of the train station. I accepted it, and I saw an advertisement for a job as an escort. I'm not a very flashy person, and I'm an introvert, so my immediate thought was that this type of job could never suit me. But at the bottom of the offer was a QR code and a website address with a line that read, "No problem if you're not a good talker." When I got home, I turned on my laptop and proceeded to the link. It was a live chat job offer. The job entailed girls talking to clients through a webcam. Content differed depending on the girl. They could choose to show their face or not to. Some wore normal clothes, while others wore revealing clothes. Some had sexual conversations and even got naked, while others steered clear of that. The site itself didn't allow anyone under the age of 18 to register, so there was a rule that it was okay to take off your clothes as long as you didn't expose your nether regions. All the customers were mostly men. They would pay money to buy points which gave them access to watch and talk to girls, and they in turn would get paid a percentage of that amount. It sounded too good to be true, and I registered right away. Since my webcam was built into my laptop, I was able to start working from that day. I didn't think anyone would be able to identify me, but I wore a wig just in case. As soon as I started streaming, customers started coming. Some men asked me to masturbate or take my clothes off, but I ignored those requests and I just talked. Men who were looking for R-rated content left straight away, but those who came just to chat remained, and I enjoyed talking with them. Strangely enough, I had no issue speaking through the webcam, so I slowly began accumulating points. I, of course, kept my true identity a secret. After a month, I had accumulated about $500 worth of points. After uni, I worked part-time at the family restaurant, and when I got home, I'd jump onto my laptop to do some live chats. Being able to earn $500 just from talking a few hours a day, 3 times a week, was a great secondary job. Maybe I was lucky because I had about 4 regular customers who would always join the chat room whenever I was logged in. These men were more interested in talking than having virtual sex. They told me I was easy and relaxing to talk to. Maybe it's because I was from a rural area, but I was often called a bit slow and dazed. Never imagined anybody would find it endearing and turn out to be a strength. I think most of the regular customers were office workers. They would pay for a lot of points for just an hour or 2 of conversation. There were times when we just texted and times when we actually spoke. There were also 2 types of settings, an open chat where others were able to see and join in, and private chats where it was invisible to others. After 2 months, I became quite close with the regulars. At first, I did everything to keep my identity as vague as possible by lying, but with the passing months, I started to get a bit slack with it. And I found myself telling them the truth when they asked me questions. Things like my age and how I went to an all-female university. I even disclosed the general area of the city that I lived in, stating that I lived somewhere in West Tokyo. After about 6 months of working on the live chat, I got a boyfriend for the first time in my life. A friend of mine introduced him to me, and after hanging out a few times, he formally asked me out. I always planned to quit this job if I ever got a boyfriend, so when it happened, I wasted no time writing on my profile that I was going to quit at the end of the month. All of my regular customers saw this and came to say goodbye. I got kind messages like, "It was fun talking to you," and "I'm sad that we won't be able to talk anymore." After our last session, I got final messages like, "Good luck with your studies," and "I wish you all the best in the future." It made me feel a bit sad, even though there were people that I'd never actually met in person. I logged in again the next day. Almost as soon as I logged in, someone entered the room and started a private chat. It was Mr. S, another regular. Mr. S only spoke through private chats and was particular about being alone with me. I wondered if he had been waiting for me to enter the room with how quickly the chat window popped up. When I clicked the respond button, he asked me whether I was going to quit. I told him I was, saying vaguely that I had a lot of things going on. He asked rather forcefully,
"What do you mean by a lot of things?"
I replied, "You know, uni, my part-time job, things like that." And he said,
"Can you explain in more detail?"
"Well, I've increased my working hours at my other job and I want to focus more on my studies."
"You can continue just at night, can't you?"
"No, I'll be studying at night. I'm sorry."
"Are you planning to study that much every single day? So much that you don't even have time to chat?"
"Yeah, I also have to study for my other qualifications."
"What about Saturdays and Sundays? Can't you log in during the day?"
"I want to go to driving school on the weekends." Mr. S was quite persistent and pushy. I dodged some of his questions by lying here and there, including the fact that I was going to get my driver's license. He was usually a calm man, so I wondered what was going on.
"Driving school? Where? You're in Hachioji, right?"
And he proceeded to tell me a name of a driving school nearby. "Yeah, something like that."
"Are you going to use the money you earned here to pay for your license?"
"No, not entirely."
"Don't lie to me!"
He suddenly yelled at me and my heart almost stopped.
You're planning to pay for your license with the money you extorted from me?
Wait, what?
How much do you think I spent on you?
The conversation ended. Or rather, I ended it. I used a forced exit function and kicked him out. Even after the call ended, my heart was still pounding. About 5 minutes later, I received a message from Mr. S. I'm sorry for yelling at you earlier. I just got flustered over the fact that I won't be able to talk to you anymore. Please don't hate me. I apologize for saying such a terrible thing. I'm so sorry. Please talk to me again. I responded, You surprised me. I'm sorry for kicking you out. I'll end it here tonight, but I'll be logging in irregularly until the end of the month. Let's talk again when we have time. I didn't log in the next day, but did so 2 days later when I got home from my part-time job. Once again, as soon as I did, Mr. S entered the room. Private chat, of course. First thing he did was apologize again for his outburst 2 days earlier. I told him it was all right, saying that I was a bit cold about it too. I didn't really think that though.
So, you're really quitting?
He said. Yeah, that's not going to change.
Good luck with the driving school.
Thank you, I replied. He then proceeded to list a couple of different driving schools around my area, trying to figure out which place I was signed up in. I never gave him a straight answer, saying things like, I wonder which one it is, and trying to make the situation feel a bit lighter. But deep inside, I was beginning to feel a bit nervous and wondered whether he had done some research. Mr. S continued,
You've been working here for 6 months, right? You told me before that you earned about $500 a month. So $500 times 6 months, that's about $3,000. Since you're a girl, I'm guessing you'll be going for an automatic license instead of a manual. A school that only teaches automatic lessons and costs $3,000 is probably this school.
He told me the name of it and asked,
How'd I do?
I was in shock. I did remember him asking how much I was able to earn on this job, and I did lie to him about getting my license, but I didn't think he would go this far to figure out where that might be. I told him lightheartedly that I wasn't going to answer any more questions, which he took as a sign that he was correct. I said I was going to log off for the night, and he began saying that I was running away because he was right. He was still talking, but I exited the room. Mr. S, whom I had been having friendly talks with up to this point, now felt like a stalker. I'd planned to quit at the end of the month, but it was this night that I decided to quit even earlier. When I checked my messages before logging out, there was one from Mr. S. It said, That driving school seems to have a good reputation, smiley face. I might go get lessons there too, LOL. Where do you go to school? Or, where are you from? We only ever talked on private chat, which was more expensive than an open chat, and he was kind and had a lot of interesting topics to talk about, so I let my guard down. I answered his questions somewhat truthfully, like the general area where I was going to uni and what prefecture I was originally from. I wasn't dumb enough to tell him the name of my school or my address, but maybe he'd figured it out. Maybe he knew my true identity. I wanted to talk to my boyfriend about it, but I didn't want him to know about the job, so I did the next best thing I could think of. I stopped logging into the chat from that day on. I was scared that night, but I forgot about it after a few days because I was excited about going on a date with my new boyfriend. At the end of the month, I went to the ATM, and upon entering my bank book, I saw that my salary from the live chat had been transferred. It was then that I remembered that I had to cancel my membership. I really didn't want to do it, but I had to log in to process my cancellation. And when I did, I froze. 100 new messages. That's what it said in the notification column. A maximum of 100 live chat messages can only be saved, and they were all from Mr. S. Hey, when are you logging in next? It's almost the end of the month. Aren't you logging in today? Are you at driving school today? Please let me know when you figure out your schedule. Hello? What happened? Are you reading my messages? Did you run away? Did you run away? Aren't you supposed to be here until the end of the month? Why aren't you logging in? Did you run away? Don't run away. Do you think you can escape? I won't let you go. There were 100 messages like that in a row. I didn't read the whole thing because I was scared. I processed my cancellation immediately. Mr. S was obviously crazy. What did he mean by running away? What did he mean when he said that he won't let me go? What did I do? I began to panic and my heart was pounding. It reminded me of those crazy murders I sometimes see on the news. A man who falls in love with a hostess or an escort. The woman is just doing her job, so she obviously has no romantic feelings for him, and ultimately, the misunderstanding causes bloodshed. Mr. S did spend a lot of money to be able to talk to me. I never said anything suggestive or led him on in any way though. But maybe I'm the only one who thinks so. Maybe there was something that I said that made him like me as more than a chat partner behind a computer screen. I was confused and I couldn't think straight. For no clear reason, I closed the curtains and chained the door. Life continued without incident even after I quit that job. I was relieved and figured he was nutty, but harmless in the end. That's until I saw something on campus one day. I was walking past a bulletin board on campus when I noticed a piece of paper pinned to it. It read, "Attention, a stalking incident has occurred. A student was followed around and asked questions by a man in his 40s or 50s when heading home after a driving lesson. All students should be careful and carry a security buzzer with them. In case of an emergency, call the authorities and do not hesitate to ask for help from the closest house." Since my school was an all-female college, we were very conscious of crime prevention. Security buzzers were distributed to all students at the entrance ceremony, and if a student ever got followed or approached by suspicious men, it was always reported to campus security and a notice was posted. The most I've ever seen were 5 separate stalking cases pinned up in a span of a week. I usually only give them a quick read, but this particular sign said driving school. The fear I felt when I got yelled at in one of our last chats and then received 100 messages came back to me. I ran into the student affairs office and asked about the notice. When I asked who made the report, the staff member was reluctant to reveal the name until I told him that I might know who that man was. The student came to the student affairs division between lectures. I didn't know her, but her hair was shoulder length and resembled the wig I was wearing during the chats. The man had asked questions like whether she was a student at this university, whether there were any other students who went to the same driving school as her, or any other driving school for that matter. He said I would be around the same height as her and have the same hairstyle, and judging from my age, that I would most likely be in my 3rd year. The poor girl was followed from the driving school all the way to the station, the man asking her questions endlessly. I was convinced. The man was Mr. S. He was obviously looking for me and had come so close. The girl said, "I think he saw my bag because it has the name of the university on it, and that's why he began asking me all those questions. He said he didn't know your name, but knew you attended an all-female university and are working part-time at a family restaurant. He said he would know if he saw your face." I had given all that information to Mr. S. There aren't that many women's universities around the area. If he asked around long enough, he would eventually find me. That much was certain. I told her that I might be the person he was looking for. I didn't mention that I'd met him through that job, just that I met him online. I also told her to run away if she ever sees him again. I skipped lectures that day and took a taxi home. I put my things down, made sure all the doors were locked, and asked my boyfriend if I could stay at his place for a while. It wasn't long before he came to pick me up on his bike. Once at his place, I came clean about everything as he listened silently. He asked me not to work that job ever again, which I quickly nodded and agreed to. I went to uni from his house and to my part-time job. Whenever I finished late, he came to pick me up. It's times like these that having a man in your life is so comforting. He made me feel very safe. About a week later, I had to go back to my apartment to get some things. It was during the day and my boyfriend came with me, so I wasn't scared, but I was secretly nervous, worried that maybe Mr. S had found my apartment and had broken in somehow. Luckily, I was wrong. Nothing seemed out of place. I quickly collected all the accumulated mail and we went back to my boyfriend's place. I spent another week at his house. I went to school and my part-time job as usual, and nothing happened. I began to think that Mr. S had given up looking for me and my sense of vigilance diminished. A week later, around noon, I went back to my apartment again to collect my mail. This time I took the train by myself and walked from the station. Several letters had arrived. Most of them were advertisements from beauty salons, but there was one brown envelope with no address on it. I didn't think anything of it, as the apartment manager would occasionally drop an envelope like this in my mailbox. So, thinking it must have been from the landlord, I collected it and went up the stairs to my room. I was about to open the door when I flinched. There was a rustling sound coming from inside the room. It wasn't a small sound like what an insect or a rodent would make. It sounded like someone was looking for something. Only my parents and my boyfriend had spare keys to my apartment. My parents never told me they'd be visiting, and my boyfriend was at work, so I knew it wasn't any of them. I backed away slowly and as quietly as I could. Once I got down the stairs, I ran like hell until I got to the police station in front of the train station. I explained the situation, and one of the two officers there got on their walkie-talkie straight away and called for backup. They made me wait there, and about an hour later, a police car came and took me to my apartment. There were several police officers in front of my apartment, and when I got out, they came over to talk to me. Apparently, someone had smashed my balcony window and had broken in. By the time the police got there, the suspect had already left and the room was empty. They asked me to go in and report what had been stolen. My wallet and bank book were at my boyfriend's apartment, so there was nothing of much value. But my computer was missing from my room and my wardrobe had been tossed. The only thing stolen was the floral dress that I often wore when doing the live chats. There was no doubt in my mind. It was Mr. S. "You might have bumped into the suspect if the timing had been a bit off," said the policeman. Mr. S finally succeeded in tracking me down. He knew where I lived. My laptop, which was full of personal information, was stolen. My dress was taken. The energy drained from my body, and I crouched down on the spot in shock, and the officer took me to rest in the police car. Once we were back at the station, I explained the situation. I told them how the trouble began online, and I also talked about how students at my school were being followed by the same man. My thoughts were all jumbled, but I did my best to tell them in chronological order what had transpired up to this point. At first, the police officer tilted his head and seemed a bit perplexed, but seeing my desperation and fear, he seemed to believe my story. My parents were contacted, and I decided to return home for a while. I couldn't go back to my boyfriend's place in case Mr. S found his place, so I packed up my things and left his apartment. When I returned home, my parents were kind. They were old, so they didn't know much about online live chats, let alone social networking sites, so the only thing they knew was that I had been the victim of a burglary. When I was sorting out my things, I found that brown envelope inside my bag. It's the letter I received from the mailbox the day Mr. S broke into my apartment. I forgot about its existence due to the commotion. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. When I looked inside, there was a printed piece of A4 paper. Don't think I need to say this, but I moved out of my apartment and quit my part-time job after this incident. I took a 6-month leave of absence from uni. I later returned to school, but I had to repeat a grade. Apparently, the police stepped up patrols around the apartment, but S was never caught. Ever since all this, I've been afraid to live alone. Being alone in a house scares me like hell. I'm also scared of men's voices over the phone and chatting online. My only relief comes from the fact that I'm still together with my boyfriend and that I was able to graduate and get a job. Before I finish, let me tell you what the letter said. It read, "Dear, my name. I missed you too much, so I decided to come see you." Smiley face. It seems like you're away for a while, so I've decided to pop into your apartment. I'll come visit you again, and I hope I get to see you next time. Smiley face. From S. P.S. I'm going to borrow your laptop for a bit, but don't worry, I'll give it back.